we have a lot of conscious mind goals. We have a lot of, I want to make X amount of money. If we have all these limiting beliefs, then you're always going to be in push-pull. And if anybody's sitting here listening and they're going, I have all these goals and I just feel like I'm stuck, like I can't break through, go find those limiting beliefs we talked about and use that tool, the auto-suggestion tool, and start reprogramming what's standing in your way. Because when your conscious and subconscious work together, the things you want to create and achieve feel so much more effortless than when you're in that push-pull friction space, which is actually conscious intending one thing, subconscious having a different set of motives, and it's very frustrating. So start with reconditioning your subconscious mind. It's great to learn your needs as well and practice communicating, but those will help us break through to the next level.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Welcome to the Impact-Driven Leader podcast with your host, me, Tyler Dickerhoof. On today's episode, I'm joined by Thais Gibson. Thais is an author, a counselor, and co-founder of the Personal Development School with a PhD and over 13 certifications in modalities such as CBT, NLP, somatic experiencing, internal family systems, and shadow work. Thais has become the leading expert in attachment theory. If you don't know about attachment theory, just wait. You're going to love this. Her modern integrated attachment theory introduces a digestible approach to understanding and healing attachment styles, leading individuals to healthier and more fulfilling relationships in all aspects of their lives. Thais, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Thank you so much.
If you haven't already gathered that.
I'm very excited to be here with you and appreciate you having me.
So to kind of jump, first thing, as I was preparing for this, I took the assessment at your website. I took the quiz, and then I sent it to my wife. Was that a bad decision?
It depends on her attachment style.
So the interesting part, so I got my results and it was secure. And so I got her results. She shared it with me secure as well. And this was the first question I had. And I'd really like you to kind of guide us there. Is it more interpretive of my own perception of my attachment or of someone else's perception of my attachment?
Great question. It's definitely more about your own perception of your attachment style because like at the end of the day, you are like self-reporting on your patterns, your different dynamics. It's always nice to get a second set of eyes if you'd really like to dive deeper into things. But I think generally, for the most part, we're able to really recognize some of our patterns, especially because for each of the different insecure attachment styles, you will know because of what you're feeling. So anxious attachment styles tend to feel a lot more anxiety in relationships. Dismissive avoidants tend to have this fear of being trapped. Fearful avoidants are very hot and cold, and they tend to experience their emotions being very magnified on both sides of that attachment continuum. And so generally, you'll see that secure attachment styles feel more stable, more consistent, don't feel as triggered by things in relationship dynamics. So generally, we'll be pretty clear based on what we're feeling and experiencing.
So can you begin by explaining a little bit deeper? You mentioned there the attachment styles, but, what are they? But then, it's a double question, right? How are they formed?
Okay, great question. So basically, we can think of our attachment styles as the subconscious set of rules we learned about love and about connection. And we all get different things modeled to us in our upbringing that basically condition us for what to expect in relationships. And so there are 4 main attachment styles. This is like one of the most thorough bodies of research that was ever done. The original attachment theory was all about how to identify attachment styles. It was done by John Bowlby out of Cambridge University. And then over time, there's a lot of shifts and changes, and the body of work we publish is about how to actually change your attachment style to become secure. So there are 4 overall attachment styles. The first one is the secure attachment style. Generally, they get very healthy modeling about love and connection growing up. So they will get a lot of what we call in psychology approach-oriented behaviors, meaning that when they cry or, children cry or fuss or are frustrated, the caregivers come towards them. And it sounds like a small thing, but when it's done consistently, it actually conditions a child to think, okay, I'm worthy of love. It's safe to express my feelings and emotions. It's safe to rely on other people and to trust them. And they basically develop this innate sense of self-confidence for what it means to connect and communicate with other people because they get a lot of healthy modeling in their upbringing. Then we have 3 insecure attachment styles. And they basically struggle a little bit more. And statistically, they have a much harder time finding lasting relationships and having thriving relationships. You can sort of imagine them as existing along a continuum. So at one end of the continuum, we have the anxious attachment style. And this is, I think everybody can think of a friend they have like this, or maybe this is their experience, but the anxious attachment style grows up with a lot of conditions that creates conditioning where they have love, but then it's taken away. So it can be that there's a divorce and one parent leaves and they're kind of out of touch, or much more commonly, we'll see that there's this, very loving set of parents, and those parents maybe work all the time. So love is there for a child and parents are gone. It's taken away. Love is there. It's taken away. And how we actually form our programming or conditioning is through repetition and emotion. We get programmed. So if there's this repeated impact over and over again, it will fire and wire neural networks that basically cause us to deeply fear abandonment. So we'll have the anxious attachment style grow up to become an adult who's terrified of being abandoned. They often have a lot of sensitivities to feeling alone, excluded, disliked, rejected, not good enough. And as a result of this, they try to constantly cling in relationships, hold on really, really tight. So that's sort of one end of the continuum. The opposite end of the continuum is our dismissive avoidant. Dismissive avoidants grow up with this overarching theme known as childhood emotional neglect. And basically what happens is even though there may be a loving, supportive family, sometimes it's neglect that flies under the radar. Sometimes it's just there's no emotional expression really allowed or encouraged in the household. And if parents are emotionally unavailable to their children personalize everything. So they don't go, oh, my parents are emotionally unavailable, so that's why I'm not getting my needs met. They go, there must be something wrong with me. I must be unworthy of connection or of having my needs met. And they adapt to this environment by becoming really closed down. And they don't want to be vulnerable and rely on other people. So they grow up to be the hyper-independent adults who often fear commitment, who often, when they get close to somebody in a relationship, may panic and kind of pull away. And they often get very afraid of being trapped or helpless or powerless if they're with the wrong person, or being weak if they are vulnerable. So those are their big attachment fears. Last but not least, we have a fearful avoidant. This is what I was as a young person. So basically, the fearful avoidant grows up with a lot of polarities about relationships. So you get kind of extremes about love. So this can be that you, for example, live in a really chaotic household where there's fighting or a bad divorce or things like that, and you're put in the middle. So that was very much my situation, sort of parentified child, saw the emotion and chaos. But it can be more extreme than that. It can be that there is a parent with a cluster B personality disorder, like narcissistic personality disorder, or it can be that we have a parent who's an alcoholic, for example. And basically, if you look at these same overarching themes, it's like you never know what you're going to get. So if you use the example or analogy, let's pretend the mother's an alcoholic. One day mom comes home, she's drinking, she's in a terrible mood, she's mean or harsh or cruel. Another day she's drinking, but not too much, and she's extra loving. One day she's sobering up, she's in a good mood. Another day she's detoxing, she's in a bad mood. It's like you never know who or what you're going to be getting. And so as a result of this child grows up to have really conflicting ideas about love. It's like, I want closeness. I have some really positive experiences with love and connection, but some really scary, confusing ones. So this person grows up to be very hot and cold. They basically share in both sides of the attachment continuum. They have moments where they feel really anxious, moments where they're like, whoa, get back. This is too much for me. And they need to pull away and become very dismissive, avoidant. And, I know speaking from personal experience, you're probably a very confusing person to be with, because one day you're like, come get close to me. And then somebody gets close and it's like, wait, get back. And so this person becomes a very hot and cold partner in relationships. So those are our 4 major attachment styles. And the body of work that we produce is all about how you can actually change your attachment style to become secure if you're not happy with your conditioned patterns.
Okay, so take a breath, because that's great, and it's great information. And your book, Learning Love and Attachment Theory, go into it deeper. Here's the great question I have. I have a belief that every single person in this world has some type of insecurity. That's my belief. That's where, the work that I do is to help leaders recognize that. Based upon kind of that premise in your work, is it that's true and we're constantly in effort to, rectify it, or is it that, there are people that are secure and never really have any insecurity, the types of insecurities that show up?
It's a great question. So for sure, everybody has some insecurities, absolutely. But I like to think of things as not being black and white, but more like a continuum. So what you're generally going to see is securely attached individuals. Every human goes through at least small T trauma at different points in life, right? So maybe there's some bullying in school, or maybe there's times you feel excluded, or times that you're scared of rejection, when you're really interested in somebody. And that's normal for our human experience. And that's going to be, pervasive throughout everybody's human experience, because nothing's always butterflies and roses and rainbows. So we'll have that for sure. But you're going to see that further along the continuum are our attachment wounds, and they'll be most specific to our close relationships. Of course, that can spill out into our workplace relationships and affect us in multiple areas of life, but you're generally going to see, and this is the way I kind of measure this, is the frequency of the triggers or insecurities and the intensity of the triggers and insecurities will be significantly more than somebody who's securely attached. So if we look at some of those attachment style wounds, anxious attachment styles have a lot of wounds around being abandoned, disliked, excluded, rejected. Dismissive avoidance, being weak or defective if they're, too open or too vulnerable, being trapped. Those are their big fears. Fearful avoidance basically share in both, and they have a hard time trusting generally. It doesn't mean that every secure person is going to trust everybody immediately and never have those wounds. Just the frequency of feeling that way in life will be far and few between. And the severity or intensity of those feelings when they come up and they're triggered will be much more about, oh, I'm nervous my needs won't get met, rather than I have all of this unresolved, stored, subconscious trauma that's now being triggered and brought up to the surface when something in my external environment touches on it.
Well, you mentioned there the subconscious, and I'm wondering is, as these insecurity, the attachment theories, attachment situations show up, is it driven by that subconscious, I'm in a stressful situation, this is how I react, as opposed to consciously, I don't react that way, but subconsciously, we don't even realize that we're perpetuating these insecure conditions?
Okay, this is a great question. So there are two things that our subconscious mind runs off of all the time. We're always making decisions based on our needs and based on our perceptions, okay? So our perceptions basically are our core wounds. If you look at wiring in the subconscious mind, I think there's a few things that are really important factually for people to understand who are listening. Number one, the conscious mind is responsible for roughly 3 to 5% of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. Subconscious and unconscious collectively, 95 to 97%. Second important fact, your conscious mind cannot outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. It can only help to recondition it. So what happens is we adopt all of this experience from childhood. And let's say, for example, you take a child who grows up in a chaotic home and they never know what they're going to get. They're going to have a lot of repetition and emotion, which is what conditions the subconscious mind, a lot of repetition and emotion of fear of trusting. So then they're going to grow up and they're going to have these stored perceptions, which we call our core beliefs, that I cannot trust, okay, or I will be betrayed. Now, what happens is you can take two people, a fearful avoidant who has these big trust wounds and a secure attachment, and they can both be exposed to the same person who's maybe untrustworthy or does something disloyal. The securely attached person, it's going to hurt their needs. They're going to have this unmet need, and that's going to feel uncomfortable. The fearful avoidant is going to have the unmet need, and that's going to feel uncomfortable, combined with all of this wiring around trust wounds, trust issues. The subconscious mind stores all of our memories. It consolidates them a little bit. But we have this warehouse of all of these pre-existing feelings, and that's how a trigger works. Somebody comes along, they touch something that's familiar. The subconscious mind goes, oh, what do we know about this? Floods all of those emotions to the surface from previous experiences. And now what a secure attachment style would be experiencing as a 3 out of 10 of discomfort. The fearful avoidant, for example, with those pre-existing wounds might experience closer to a 10. And so that's really those differences. Everybody will have those insecurities and woundings, but how our subconscious has stored them and what it does with them is what really makes that big difference.
So you've kind of created this mountain of the idea that our subconscious drives 95 to 97% of our actions per se, right? And conscious 3 to 5. How do we manage that? Meaning if I react in a way, let's go back to my wife, right? Both secure and yet We've been married, this year will be 19 years. So we've gone through some ups and downs and gives and takes, right? Raised completely different homes. And what I'm wondering, based upon what you just said, is she doesn't know, or I don't know. Let's put it on me, not on her. She's not here having a conversation with us. She'd appreciate it if I didn't call her out, right? It's on me. I don't realize that I'm acting in an insecure way that will either trigger her or that I've been triggered. I don't see it. I'm not aware of it. How do I manage that?
Great question. So when it comes to going from insecure attachment style to secure attachment style, there's a few really crucial areas to dive into. One is core wound reconditioning. So actually, we're not born with these core wounds. We can recondition them. Number two is learning our own needs so that we can meet them in relationship to self, which is a big part of self-soothing, and communicate them in relationships to others. So what you're speaking of is specific to that dynamic. It's like if somebody does something that hurts you or you do that's insecure or maybe unhealthy in some way, what a secure attachment person would do generally is they would go and they would address the issue because they usually have a lot of modeling around healthy communication, negotiation of needs. It's safe to be vulnerable and express my feelings, which is why you'll see securely attached people, even though they'll have challenges just like anybody else, they know how to navigate and they are more equipped to do so through a better understanding of their needs, a better understanding of their boundaries, and being able to communicate and negotiate through problems. What you'll see with insecure attachment styles is they usually do not communicate their needs. They usually don't know their needs, don't realize they even have them. The anxious attachment style is too busy people pleasing to share their truth. The dismissive avoidance is too afraid of being vulnerable to speak up. And so they just get caught in these unresolved dynamics that just build resentment until there's fighting and chaos and accusations. And that's the major difference that you'll see. So what we're trying to do is if we're securely attached, we keep doing what we're doing, we communicate, and we resolve problems in that way. If we are insecurely attached, we need to learn to foster those communication tools, that awareness of our needs, and that capacity and ability to leverage principles of the subconscious mind to rewire these wounds or limiting beliefs to begin with, these ideas that I bring to every relationship. Before I became securely attached, I would go into every relationship being like, yeah, it's easy to connect with people, but then when you really get close to them, you can't trust them. So watch out. And that is idea, it's like our baggage. It's like this dysfunctional program I was taking from my own childhood and projecting onto other people. And as I learned to rewire these things through repetition and emotion and through the ways that the subconscious mind gets programmed, I was able to set myself free of these core wounds, learn to self-soothe better by meeting my own needs, and learn to communicate with other people more effectively in a way that would be able to solve problems and get my needs met.
How much does curiosity interject here? And curiosity meaning that, okay, you bring up, I have big T trauma, right? I have little t trauma. My little t trauma is perpetuating some of these insecure responses and attachment styles. And how much does it take me being curious to say, oh, why did I react to my wife saying something? Or why did she react to me saying something? Or in the workplace, I said this to, Bob, and he reacted as like, whoa, that isn't what I intended. How much does that take internal curiosity to start to wonder, I wonder why I or others react the way they do?
Well, it's a huge part of it. I mean, like research just into narcissism as an example. Narcissists have such a very difficult time resolving things because they struggle with a lack of insight. And so obviously that's separate from different attachment styles, but you can see we can't really solve for things if we're not curious about ourselves or curious about other people. And part of empathizing with other people is curiosity. It's our ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes and try to unpack and understand what someone else is experiencing. Now, something that's really interesting that you touched on is when we go through something that triggers us, there's a very simple question we can ask ourselves, and it will help us discover our individual core wounds and thus be able to communicate them with others. And it's, what did I make this situation mean about me? So I had this couple, and this is back when I was running my client practice that I since retired since doing the personal development school, but I ran a very busy client practice seeing about 40 people a week for the better part of 10 years. And I had this couple come in one day, and they came in, it was their first session. We were kind of unpacking like this discovery dynamic of like, what's going on between them? Why are they here? And somehow very early on, they got into the conversation of laundry. And it was a husband and wife. And the laundry, the wife was so angry that the laundry was always on the floor. And she started talking about it. And it was our first session. And I saw her speak and her hands were visibly shaking. Like she was feeling rage. And as she started getting really angry, I saw the husband, he starts to kind of shrink down. And you can tell he's like feeling very hurt by how angry she is. And so I asked her, I said, well, when he leaves the clothes on the floor, what do you make it mean about you? And she had this big core wound from her own childhood that I am disrespected. And I asked him when she gets really angry, because that's when he started getting triggered, what do you make it mean about you? And he says, I do so much for the family. I try so hard. I'm the provider. I work all the time. And I feel like when she gets so angry about things like this, she doesn't love me or care about me and how I'm feeling. So here you have two people trying to solve the problem of feeling disrespected and unloved by talking about the clothing on the floor. And it's like, you're never going to get there. It's going to be impossible to solve for that when this is the experience. And so part of what's so valuable for us to ask ourselves, to your point of curiosity, is when we are triggered, it's because there's a pre-existing core wound. He had unloved wounds from his mother growing up. She had disrespected core wounds from her father growing up. So of course, these are the things that are going to get triggered. These are going to be the pieces of meaning we assign to painful situations. And so when we can say to ourselves, okay, I'm feeling really upset. What am I making the situation mean about me? We'll start to discover what it is that's really going on. And then we can empower communicating about that instead of the surface level symptoms, the gas tank, the clothes on the floor, the dishes. It's never about that.
It's the dishwasher. It's the dishwasher. Like my wife gets so upset, she'll load the dishwasher and she has a different style of loading the dishwasher. I have a style, my own. And so I'll go in and I'll load dishes and I'll reorganize. And she gets so upset. And it's just like, I'm not thinking less of you. I'm not tearing you down. It's just, it's quirky.
Exactly.
Right? It's good to be laundry too. Here's the question. What's the solution to that, right? You had a great example of laundry. You have them ask the question, what did I make this about me, right? What story did I tell myself? What's the solution then in those cases? Because I could see that happening in the workplace. I could see that happening, in many different areas. What's the solution?
Okay, so there's a proactive and a reactive solution. The reactive solution, which is still a good one, is to learn to communicate about that to somebody. Hey, you might not realize it, but when the clothes are on the floor, I experience that as feeling disrespected, and it's really painful for me. And so can we work on it? And it gives our partner or a friend or a coworker, depending on the situation, more context to take things more seriously. And that's a great thing to do. But my take is always, well, do you want to keep dealing with it retroactively all the time? Or do we want to recondition these ideas that we're caring about ourselves to begin with? So there's a really easy starter tool, and I'll share it now. It's called auto-suggestion belief reprogramming. So basically how this works is we have to first recognize that our conscious mind is not choosing this. These are subconscious problems. So we don't wake up and say, today I'm going to tell myself 47 times that I'm not good enough, or I'm disrespected, or I'm going to be abandoned, and see how it goes. These are not conscious choices. They are pre-existing subconscious programs. So we have to deal with them where they exist. Now, your conscious mind speaks language. Your subconscious mind speaks in emotions and images. It doesn't speak language. So if I say to you, whatever you do, do not think of the pink elephant. Your brain does it. You can't help it. So when people do affirmations, I'm really not sold on the idea of affirmations.
I'm still thinking about the pink elephant. Sorry, Thais.
And so you have this dynamic of like, people say affirmations, I'm good enough, I'm good enough. You're just speaking to your conscious mind. You're using your conscious mind to speak to your conscious mind with affirmations. The problem's subconscious. So we have to speak in the language of the subconscious. And we get, if you look into neuroplasticity, we get rewired through repetition, emotion, and imagery. So we want to reprogram these pre-existing ideas that we've been carrying about ourselves from past small t or big T trauma situations that we're sick and tired of. Then we have to do 3 crucial steps. Step 1, we find that core belief, that thing we're always telling ourselves, I'm disrespected, I'm unloved, I'm going to be abandoned, I can't trust, I'll be trapped, these big fears that we always have. And we find its opposite. If it's I'm trapped, I'll be free. I'll be abandoned, I'll stay connected. I'm unloved, I'm loved, right? So very simple. What's that big story you're carrying about yourself? Find its opposite. Step 2, we need to find memories. Why do we need to find memories? Because all memories are just a series of emotions and images. So if I were to say, tell me your favorite childhood memory, you might be like, I was on the playground, and you would see the images of the slide, and you would smile as you're telling the memory. It's the container for emotions and images, every memory. So we need repetition of emotions and images. So we just need repetitive memories to counteract the core wound. So step 2 is we come up with 10 pieces of memories of times we did feel good enough, or we did see that we were lovable, or we did feel worthy, or we were connected. So we come up with 10 memories. We record it, step 3, and we listen back to it for 21 days, because research into neuroplasticity shows it takes 21 days to make new neural pathways, fire them and wire them enough that they start to really take shape. And so 3 simple steps, and it actually helps us let go of these ideas. And I can speak on behalf of myself as somebody who did a lot of work on these things, that I do not carry all of these core wounds that I had, and I'm hardly ever triggered anymore. But also, we've had more than 31,000 people come through our programs and have so many of the same experiences. So it's really simple, and people can start immediately doing that work.
I have this belief, again, coming back to insecurity, that everyone struggles with insecurity, and especially in a leadership or in a relationship, the solution to that is empathy. Now, I believe as I'm listening to you, and it takes curiosity to want to be empathetic, and I believe that. I also think that part of that is it takes vulnerability. I describe empathy as putting your arms around someone and walking with them. Do you describe that? Say for example, you're working with someone and they're triggered, they're bringing up these insecurities, and you try to work with, you try to help them get there, be curious enough to come back to these core beliefs, and they're like, I don't want to go there. I don't like, either I didn't have little t trauma, or I can't think of things right in this, almost like my solution to the pain or whatever I believe is just block it out. Like, I don't want to allow you to be empathetic because I don't want to allow you to put your arm around me, and vice versa. How do we navigate through that in relationships?
It's a great question. And so, right there, because somebody's not willing to do that work or get curious about themselves, as long as we have those old beliefs, they're going to create havoc on our lives. You can see when people feel trapped, they push people away so suddenly, or they're afraid of abandonment, they hold on way too tight, or they can't trust, they're unwilling to be vulnerable. But at least what we can do is we can start communicating around our needs. So in the very least, we can start saying, okay, well, what do you need to feel relief in this situation? I see you're upset. There's this dynamic that I would follow with people who had very highly triggering relationships, and it's just a framework. In order to solve a conflict, even if we're not willing to do the proactive work of reconditioning those belief patterns, so we're always going to have those triggers coming up more frequently than the average person, we can use a 4-step framework about communicating. So we can see if somebody's really triggered. We start by validating their feelings, okay? It's kind of like a magic wand. It goes a very long way. Now, people will be like, what if I don't want to validate their feelings? There's a difference between validating somebody's feelings versus their behaviors. I can see somebody really angry who raises their voice, and I can say, hey, I totally see that you're hurt and that you're upset right now, and I understand that, and it's not okay to raise your voice, right? So we can validate the feelings. It helps people calm right down because they feel seen and heard, which, if you've ever noticed, every time we express anger in unhealthy ways, it's a subconscious strategy to get seen and to get heard and to finally get expressed properly and to take your power back, right? People wave their hands and they get louder with their voice. They're trying to get seen and heard. So we can actually help, fast track that process in a healthy way by just being able to say, hey, I see that you're upset right now. I get why you're upset. So to your point, empathizing with them, just expressing it in a very validating way. Step 2, what do you need to feel better right now? Right? We're just asking about their needs. Even if they don't know them, they're going to come up with some kind of answer. I need the situation to be ABC. And then we flip it around and we make sure that we are also getting to have our feelings expressed and our needs met by turning around and saying, okay, I can show up for your need in this way. And for me in this situation, when you raise your voice or when situation X happens, I feel ABC, and this is what I'm needing going forward. And then we at least set ourselves up for negotiation. So if people are not willing to do that pre-existing work, we at least have healthy conflict communication tools that can empower us to resolve situations more effectively.
What drove you to, you come back to your insecurity of being fearful. What drove you to be curious to say, I got to address this?
I think I was just tired of relationships feeling very hard. I had a very difficult time with relationships. As soon as people get close to me, I would need to jet in the other direction. And I went through a series of relationships where I was just pushing people away. And I was just struggling personally. And I was like, well, there has to be another way of doing life like this. And I was actually in a psych class and it had nothing to do with what we were learning. And somebody said, your conscious mind can't outwill or overpower your subconscious mind. And to me, that was like earth shattering. That was like, well, what do you mean? Like that applies to everything. That applies to all those times we say we're going to do something for our New Year's resolutions or our goals. And then our subconscious is like, nope, we're going to do this instead. We're going to go back to not exercising or to eating chocolate or to procrastinating work or whatever it is. And it was like, well, if you can really learn to understand how the subconscious gets programmed and reprogram it so it works in your favor, if it's responsible for 95 to 97% of everything, I want to get really good at that. So my first pathway while I was actually still in school was to go down a year-long certification for hypnotherapy. And then I thought the dynamics of hypnotizing people were strange. It was like they come in, you do it for them, you send them off, they have to come back if they have another problem. It's like that's not really empowering people. It's like give the man a fish instead of teach the man to fish.
It's kind of like our medical systems. Like, yeah,
Totally.
I want you to keep coming back, right? Or lawyers, yeah, just keep coming back.
Take the addictive pharmaceuticals. That's its own conversation.
Yeah, that's a whole different conversation, Thais. We're not going there today. We don't have enough time.
But,
you have a plane to catch at some point. We don't have enough time.
But yes, the long story short, I don't believe in fostering dependency. I really want to empower people to be able to figure these things out about how to recondition their subconscious themselves. So I put a lot of that into frameworks because I saw how well it worked for me and wanted to be able to share that with others.
You mentioned there that there was a self-awareness that I don't want this to continue. But I also believe there was a self-love that said, I don't deserve this to continue. Like I deserve to be loved. I love myself enough to understand I don't need to live this way. Like how do those work together in tandem?
I wish I could be like, I loved myself so much. I was a very self-destructive person. I definitely like internalized a lot. Most people, like when I tell them this now, are like, oh, sure, whatever. But I was very self-destructive. I had a very hard time in a lot of areas of my life. So my backstory really is like, I played soccer in university, had a knee injury, was addicted to opiates for 6.5 years. And a lot of that was in self-loathing. That was a big part of why I got into the subconscious mind is because I was like, well, like every day you're like, I'm going to get sober. I'm going to get clean. I'm going to do these things. And then you just go back to the same patterns. And I had this acute awareness that like I'm numbing emotional pain with painkillers. And I had really internalized a lot of like big T and small T trauma. And I was numbing that way. And so that was honestly like the biggest catalyst. I think rather, I wish I could be like, I was so self-loving, but I was not. I was very harsh to myself and like the way I would be in my internal dialogue and things. But I was more like, this sucks so much and pain is a good motivator. And I definitely went through a rock bottom enough personally that I started looking for other answers. And things sort of came together for me in that way during a tough time and very lucky because of it.
Do you think that journey is pretty universal for people that get to the point of, as we're talking here, is like, I'm curious enough to go look for the source of the origin of these unmet needs personally, internally? Do you think that's universal or what other ways that people get there?
I think that it's universal as a possibility, but I'm not sure I can say it's universal that everybody follows through with that introspection. And so, I think that's within all of us. I do think that like everything we feel is feedback. Like it's just often feedback for things that are other than our external world. So sometimes we'll be triggered and we'll be like, it's them. They're doing this to me. Yeah. And sometimes it's more like, well, actually, you have a pre-existing wound there or an unmet need. And it's giving you feedback, but it's about your inner world that you're getting feedback. So I think all of the time we have a system that's actually working for us in terms of our wiring to give us feedback about something being unresolved or out of alignment. But we have to have the willingness to face it courageously and go inward and be like, well, what's going on inside of me? Maybe I'm the problem sometimes too, and investigate so that we can actually repair.
That one thing that I think about here, and you mentioned about how the conditions at home created that fearful attachment, right? That mindset of, let's say the chaoticness, right? The chaos, the all over the place. And one thing that I've heard in preparation of this is that a lot of these conditions were set when we were very, very young, even before our active memory goes back to. And I wonder in myself, in this idea, I've gone through, there's an author, Mike Foster, he has the primal questions. And the question I, answered was, am I, wanted? Am I, do I have something of value? And I think back that insecurity, where did that come from in my childhood, right? Is it because I have an older sister? Is it because of what was maybe going on, the dynamics of my family? Like, that's something that we can go deeper into, because as I'm sharing that, I'm thinking of an instance. I didn't know this until, maybe 2 years ago. My parents were struggling. I had an older sister, younger sister. My younger brother wasn't born yet. And I might have been around 18 months, 2 years of age. And my parents were in a tough spot. I grew up on a dairy farm, dairy business, and they ended up losing the farm. They were renting it, and they were kind of scattered. So my family's cows were all over the place. And their house they lived in was on this farm they got kicked out of. And I didn't know this again until 2 years ago. I'm 44. That I lived with my aunt and uncle for several months because my parents were trying to figure it out. And so I think of this instance, could that have subconsciously driven me to this later point, am I wanted?
100%. I mean, that would be an exact scenario that would be a match for that wound. And it's because we get programmed through repetition plus emotion. And obviously you'd be repeatedly feeling, where are my parents? Am I wanted as a child? And how could you not? But also, even if that were one just scare instance where you were with your parents, your aunt and uncle, and then your parents came and took you back, the level of emotion will imprint the subconscious mind very quickly. So somebody could go, be in a situation where they're not afraid of feeling unsafe at all, and then they get in an earthquake, and the next day they wake up and they're feeling unsafe all the time. So if there's very intense emotion, it can actually imprint or program the subconscious immediately as well. So you have the repetition and the emotion there for that kind of belief system to form.
There's another piece of that is how much do we perpetuate the experiences we had subconsciously knowing? For example, if you wouldn't have gone through the effort of digging back and finding out, understanding and evolving forward from this fearful, how much would you have created that in your own family? And would you go try to seek that in relationships? Or I think about in the workplace, right? I was brought up in this very, avoidant, dismissive, fearful type of work environment. And so when I start leading others, that's what I create subconsciously, because I don't know any different, because that's just what I know.
So you're touching on one of the most important facts about the subconscious mind, which is that the subconscious mind really wants to maintain its comfort zone, because it equates familiarity to safety and thus survival. And we're very much just survival wired at the end of the day. So what you'll find is not only do we actually end up investing in people who will mirror those experiences back to us, but we will often pass those experiences on to others unless we do that reprogramming work. And it's kind of the concept of ancestral trauma, or in a sense, epigenetics, right? And so there's this dynamic of us going, it's actually really wild. You'll see people where an anxious attachment style, okay, let's say they grow up and they're kind of in that space of fearing abandonment. So they become hyper-focused on their external world, okay? So they're in a chronic state of self-abandoning. They're people-pleasing all the time. They're putting everybody's feelings and needs above their own. They're self-abandoning. Guess who they often get attracted to in relationships? People who are also emotionally unavailable and likely to abandon them, because the conscious mind can go, red flags, this isn't what I'm looking for. The subconscious mind says, ooh, this is so familiar. This is what I want to invest in. And I would see clients, and this is not me in any way victim blaming or anything like that, but I saw tons of clients who came out of relationships with true narcissists, not the throw around term, pop psychology.
The modern day.
Yeah. A true narcissistic personality disordered person. And unfortunately, for them to even be in that relationship was the same story every time without exception. First, these individuals were extremely self-critical, violated their own boundaries all the time, manipulated themselves to become whoever they thought people wanted them to be. and really didn't empathize with themselves. They were too busy focusing on everybody outside of them. So what happens is consciously you meet somebody, they have the red flags of a narcissist, but subconsciously the narcissist, what do? They don't empathize. They're very critical. They manipulate. They violate boundaries. This is what somebody was already doing to themselves. So consciously the mind goes, this isn't good, but your subconscious runs the show at 95+% of all of your decisions. And the subconscious goes and invests in that relationship because the narcissist mirrors back to them the relationship they have to themselves. And that's what we're all doing all the time. And that's why we're so likely to end up with the same type of person that we're dating if we have some unhealed stuff, or that we're likely to be, investing in the same type of, I had a fearful avoidant person in one of our programs last week, and she was like, I'm always in startups. And she's like, I've been in startups. I'm in my mid 40s. I don't need to be in startups. And I'm investing in my comfort zone of chaos because that was my childhood. And so I go back into this chaotic environment, even though I want to outgrow this, I want something more consistent and stable. But I keep going back. I never have time with my kids and all these things. But she realized it was that subconscious comfort zone. So when we recondition the comfort zone, those external decisions change.
I think what's so interesting here is so much in our society, we look at self-development, we look at personal growth, we look at skill enhancement, and even we can maximize strengths, we can look at those things. But often I feel like those are so much of a Band-Aid, or they're a accelerant on what's there, that we never take the time to dig to the root, right? I think of Dr. Caroline Leaf. She talks about mental roots and our thoughts that come that way. And I think about, as you're saying here, it's understanding our experiences. And so often we are just so either fearful, hesitant, or people aren't saying, hey, you can't fix the problem until you really, really understand the roots of it, tracing back to that origin. So when someone shifts and starts to go through that path, looking for, secure attachment, how does that actually show up in their life?
The first thing that happens is you get less triggered, less frequently. And it sounds funny, but for people who are insecurely attached who have a lot of core wounds, they can be triggered on a daily basis. And to me, it's like, how are you going to show up and build a career and a family and be the best version of yourself when every day you're coping from something, right? It's like your mental bandwidth is taken up. And I can say
it's exhausting.
It is. And just from experience, like, for your internal dialogue to be centralized around some problem you're having almost every day, and then to be like, preoccupied about it and frustrated, versus as I did the work and became securely attached, I'm like, how did I live like that? Like, it's like, and so first of all, when your internal dialogue clears up, because if you look at beliefs, you can think of beliefs as a tree trunk, right? If I believe I am trapped, I'm helpless, I'm powerless, all those wounds we were talking about, they create patterns of thought. So the patterns of thought are kind of like tree branches coming off of that tree trunk of that core belief. And then what do we feel? Well, our emotions will follow. If I believe I'm not good enough, I'll start thinking things like, I'm not interesting enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not whatever enough. And then I'll feel insecure or sad or defeated or whatever it might be. So we have our beliefs lead to thoughts, to emotions. And then funnily enough, neuroscience has actually proven every decision we make is actually based on our emotional state. So even people are like, I'm so logical and rational, you're still making emotionally based decisions at the tipping point, and then you just rationalize through logic. And so we have this like formula of what's happening all day, every day. And when we can just reprogram the core wound, we get all of this bandwidth back for how to actually focus on what we want to create and the relationships we want to build and what we want to do in the world, instead of this like coping every day with a new problem that's actually based on your old past wounds and experiences that you're reliving all the time. So that's the first big piece. And then when we learn our needs, we can actually fulfill ourselves. We know what we want in a relationship. We can communicate our needs to people. We can get more seen and heard and feel more connected. We can choose careers that are more conducive to what our truth is in terms of our needs, and make decisions like that accordingly, even our friendships or family relationships. And when we're finally empowered to communicate with people, we can solve problems and not carry all of this resentment in the background all the time. So people feel better, they live better, they're more, productive, they're much more able to achieve things they're looking for, both interpersonally and, career-wise. So yeah, very important work to be doing.
So as we wrap up here, what's the best decision we can make to start positively shifting our lives to get the things that we truly want and desire?
I would say the best decision is to look at what's not serving you first, what's standing in your way. We have a lot of conscious mind goals. We have a lot of, I want to make X amount of money. Well, we have all these limiting beliefs, then you're always going to be in push-pull. And if anybody's sitting here listening and they're going, I have all these goals and I just feel like I'm stuck, like I can't break through, go find those limiting beliefs we talked about and use that tool, the auto-suggestion tool, and start reprogramming what's standing in your way. Because when your conscious and subconscious work together, the things you want to create and achieve feel so much more effortless than when you're in that push-pull friction space, which is actually conscious intending one thing, subconscious having a different set of motives, and it's very frustrating. So start with reconditioning your subconscious mind. It's great to learn your needs as well and practice communicating, but those will help us break through to the next level.
I mean, there's so much self-sabotage that we don't realize that's occurring until we become curious enough to be aware that it's happening all over us, all around us. And I take that, it's like, just be aware, start to ask the question, what did I make? How did I make this about me? Or what did I make this situation about me? That's what I gather from you there.
Absolutely. What do I make this mean about me and that core wound?
Yeah.
There's no such thing as self-sabotage either. It's like all that happens with self-sabotage, and there is, like, in a sense, but it's your conscious mind saying, I'm going to do this. And your subconscious mind have different programs that work against it. That's what we experience as self-sabotage, is just our conscious intending one thing, subconscious having different motives. We're not like waking up like, I'm going to sabotage myself today. So when we experience self-sabotage,
subconscious.
Exactly. It's when we experience self-sabotage, because it is a thing, like, I'm not negating what you were saying, but it's actually just feedback that we have something blocking us, that if we just go inwards and find out what it is and recondition it, like, we can be free of that experience. The best thing to do, honestly, is to validate their feelings and ask what they need. Because whatever you think you're trying to do, you can't control the meaning they give it. So you might go help do the laundry, and as an example, right? And let's say your wife, as an example, goes there and is like, he thinks I can't do it properly, right? Like, she could make it mean whatever based on her pre-existing experiences. And that you have no control over, because that's her pre-programming, and we can't mind read that either. So instead, if you're like, hey, honey, I see you're a little bit stressed. Is there anything I can do? What do you need? You leave no room for misinterpretation, for her to give anything that's negative meaning from past experiences. And you're just validating her emotions rather than trying to do something that it can re-trigger her if she's already in a triggered space. And I think at the end of the day, like, it's really important to remember we're each 100% responsible for our 50% of the relationship. So, sometimes we want to help so much and support so much. And the best thing we can do is, like, stay in our center, make sure that we're feeling good, and ask somebody, what are you feeling? What do you need? And allow them to meet us part way. If we try to, like, do everything perfectly for them, we just go into self-abandonment, which will create resentment. Instead, if we can just leave this open dialogue for them to come in, when you ask somebody, hey, I see you're a little stressed. Is there anything I can do? What do you need? It forces them to self-reflect too, which is a huge part of what we've been talking about, that original insight. And so it also is conducive to that person growing as well.
Love it. Love it. Thais, where can people learn more about your work, what products and sources and resources that you have? Where can they find out more about that stuff?
Yeah, so at personaldevelopmentschool.com, we have actually personaldevelopmentschool.com/ free trial. We actually do these like 90-day boot camps to become securely attached. And they are self-paced. You can join anytime, but you actually have daily support with myself or with other counselors and coaches that we have in there. So there's a lot of support. There's like coursework that you can do, and that can be tried out fully for free at personaldevelopmentschool.com/free trial. And then on YouTube, Personal Development School _Thais Gibson.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, so forth and so on. Then by rating and reviewing each episode, you can help more people discover impactful leaders like Thais. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.